Okay then. Here we've got Witold Tietze, who is script editor, director and actor. Tell us how
And
you got...
writer, let's not forget.
and
Writer of this brilliant tome.
Tell us how you got involved with BTI.
Ooh, that's a good question. That's so long ago. Well, I remember that Matthew was farming around his Invasion of the Daleks script at a Doctor Who meeting, at BDWFC, of course. And
Sadly no longer with us.
sadly no longer with us, yes. And I think basically he was after actors at the time, and me being the busybody I am with all things written, I decided I could probably have a hand in this, tidy it up a bit. Certainly, if nothing else, if I was going to get a role, I'd want decent dialogue to have. So Scott, I remember Scott and I were working on the script, just trying to tidy up a few lines of dialogue. We didn't really do much to it. And from there on, I basically just sort of nosed myself in and said, Matt, you're doing another story, would you like me to be script editor? And I've kind of stuck with the job since, really.
Okay, and what's the difference between actually just performing an adapted script, as Invasion of the Daleks was, and actually writing one yourself?
Well, certainly just acting a pre-written script. The script is there, the story is there, it's all very much a surprise. Writing it yourself, you have to come up with the idea, you have to storyline it. Nothing comes as a surprise, except usually when it is finally performed, and then suddenly you can sit back from it and you start to notice all these things that you never picked up on before, even though you've written it yourself. It's basically a matter of being closer to the project, so it may be more exactly the story that you want to tell yourself, but it's certainly, there are no surprises, obviously, because you know everything that's going to happen, unless it writes itself, which very rarely happens.
Did Darkness Falls write itself?
Parts did. The first episode definitely did. In fact, it was originally about twice as long as it is now. I had a great long 15-minute chunk that had nothing to do with the rest of the story, just because I wanted to be different, basically. But that soon went, because otherwise it would have been far longer than the other parts, and it would never have fit on a CD. So, but the other parts didn't really write themselves quite as much. I seem to recall part 3 did, but then I wasn't particularly happy with that one, which is why, and I hope I'm allowed to put in a slight spoiler here, which is why it's now written in blank verse. That only occurred in the second draft. The other 2 parts were sort of bits and pieces here and there, but generally each episode got written fairly quickly, in the space of, I think, a week at most. But there again, I did have a 3-month gap between writing each episode.
Is that your regular writing style?
I have no regular writing style. Some scripts can take me years to write, some can take me a day. So it all depends on the material, how much of a story I have prepared, how much focus I want to put on either the story or the characters, and I suppose how busy I am with other things.
Yeah, you also played a number of different characters. What can you tell us about some of them?
You'll notice that a couple of them are Scottish. This has become something of a running theme. I remember that in the early days, Scott wanted to bring back either Andrews from Invasion of the Daleks or a relative of his. And that's where McAndrews comes in the Gallifreyan Recommencement. So that's why those 2 are Scottish. The others, Captain Ricketts, was it? I can't actually remember the name now. Basically, I wanted to do a bit of a gruff, middle-aged captain, which I don't think came across through my voice as well as I'd hoped. The one role that certainly my favourite role is Thomas Caldwell in Darkness Falls. Not only because I wrote him, but because the character was originally written as sort of other me, as it were. He's very much based on me as a person, and I'd written him into a couple of other stories previously, so certainly I've got the greatest history with him, and that's definitely why I wanted to cast myself in the role.
Yet he speaks with an American accent. Is that prevalent, or something you'd like to envisage in an alternate version of yourself?
It's just a sort of slightly alternate take on me. the first story that I wrote him in, I gave him a bit of an extensive background, and it's basically, I think he is how I would see myself if my family had ended up in, well, certainly if my father had ended up after the war in America instead of New Zealand as he did, and as the line would have continued on there.
So, in creating a particular character, you've used the role player's aim of putting yourself into a character. Do you have any reservations about that sort of thing? Because I've read some people do.
Well, I tried not to put in anything that was too personal, but certainly the more general aspects of myself and my family history were very useful in creating a more rounded three-dimensional character.
Any plans for next season or anything beyond that?
Oh, we've got a few rough plans for the next season. We have a basic outline of how the stories are going to flow in the season, and we've got a couple of ideas, a couple of prospective writers. We've actually got a storyline in already, and I'm somehow trying desperately to get those unused pages from Darkness Falls Part 1 into a story of their own, but I'm not quite sure how successful that's going to be. Generally, plans are still fairly loose at this early stage. Matthew and I have been focusing more on other projects such as the upcoming film, Matthew's Blake 7 spin-off, and our original series, The Alien Factor.
Yeah, tell us a little more about that. What's it involved?
Pardon?
Tell us a little more about the Alien Factor.
Well, okay, the Alien Factor is something I came up with, I think 5 or 6 years ago. It was originally going to be, well, it was at various times going to be a television series, video series along the lines of Bill Baggs videos, the Stranger videos in particular, then a TV series again, and now it's taking life as an audio series. I think mostly so it can get out there and be heard. It's just, I can't remember where the original idea came from. I still have a copy of every single set of notes that I've taken of it, except the first set of notes, which I can tell because the second set of notes refer to the first set. So maybe if I still had that document I could get an idea of where it came from. But it was just my attempt, I think, at creating something that was longer lasting than, say, a one-off film script or a one-off serial or something like that. And over the last 5 years, it's really evolved into something incredibly big, incredibly complex, and I'll be happy if we can relate even half of that across in the audio dramas that we plan to do.
Cool. Any little snippets you can let us in on without spoiling anything?
Well, I could probably only provide snippets from the first part, so as to not give too much away. Certainly there are going to be a lot of surprises in store as it progresses. Basically, the story is about a covert government organisation, not entirely dissimilar to the organisation that Mulder and Scully keep fighting in the X-Files, except this is the Australian branch. They are interested in all things paranormal, particularly aliens, and basically they just try to keep the information of them from the public. Suddenly they come across a woman who seems to be an extraterrestrial, but they're not entirely sure. In fact, she's not entirely sure either because most of her memory has gone. So there's a lot of enigma circling the central character. But strangely, I think a lot of character association would come from her because, well, the other regular characters are sociable enough, but each of them have their shades of grey, their dark sides, so it's hard to tell who the audience is going to relate to. I think time will tell, and when the first one is heard by other people and we get an impression of what's going on, I'll know better. I mean, this is definitely a project that I'm far too close to be able to tell objectively or even predict objectively what people are going to think of it.